Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi to Ask Zajef Clorinde Edition. As usual for these Ask Zajef videos, I start by going through overall power level, place in the meta, whatever's changed since her previous banner, and then I start taking questions from chat, more specifically on her. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. How good is Clorinde? She's okay, but she's not outstanding. A description that I see people use for her pretty often, and that I think is honestly fairly accurate, is that Clorinde is the best mid character. She's arguably the best Electro dedicated carry, and she performs well in every archetype that can use Electro carries, but she's not particularly outstanding in any of them. In terms of value on an account, she's one of those characters that isn't reliant on Bennett or on a Hydro support. She has multiple different archetypes that don't use either Bennett or Hydro supports, which means that she tends to be a character that you can very easily slot in on your second side with pretty much any carry on the first side. She is somewhat reliant on Fischl, which slightly limits your second side option, but outside of that, the teammates she's good with are pretty interchangeable. Her main three teams are going to be chevreuse teams, aggravate teams, and hyperbloom teams. And here, I'm saying hyperbloom teams, but if you're playing hyperbloom teams, you're a lot more interested in the quick bloom teams that have good quicken up time than the pure hyperbloom teams. In most of these teams, you use Fischl, and then you kind of mix and match for the rest. If you're using a chevreuse team, you can use chevreuse plus Maoika or Changeling. If you're doing an aggravate team, you can use Nahida plus Xilonen. You can use Yao Yao Kazuha. You can use Kirara, Sucrose. You got mix and match from all of those. You can also do stuff like some weird taser bullshit with Auron, but to me, that's not particularly worth mentioning. Like, it works. You can do it if you like Auron, but it's not what I would gravitate towards. Same stuff, yeah, for you can use Emilie in burning load teams. Pretty much any archetype where you can use an electro carry, Clorinde is gonna work. And in most of them, she's going to tend to be the one of, if not the best electro on-fielders, but not by that much. You don't necessarily need to use Fischl. Mainly, I know that there's some people that like the Omega Sweaty Sarah, swap in and out of Sarah, go back into her to use her charge attack with chevreuse. Personally, my thoughts on it are don't do that to yourself. What's wrong with you? But if you really want to, then go ahead. You can use Beidou if you want more defensive focused teams. You can use Yai if you hate yourself, I guess. And then what's changed in the meta since her last banner? Xilonen has given her aggravate teams a lot more defensive options, right? Xilonen's ability to heal allows you to play Nahida and still have a defensive option, and Nahida's fairly strong, so that's nice. Auron has opened up some taser options to be fine. Maoika has given you a lot more options in your chevreuse teams and has made them stronger. And Lan Yan has given you a proper shield option in the Animo slot for the aggravate teams. And I guess for the other archetypes as well, but mostly for the aggravate teams. I guess I haven't mentioned Pyro MC either. Pyro MC also kind of does the same thing as Maoika, but worse. But yeah, I really don't have that much to say about Clorinde's place in the meta, because she's kind of just a character that exists. So, that does it for that section. Let's start taking questions from chat. What is her optimal set for Chevreuse Overload? I guess we can talk about her optimal sets in general as well. Her optimal set is pretty much always going to be Whimsy. There are situations where TF is good, but the main thing that makes TF potentially good is that with TF, you can end up getting two E's, or two E durations in a rotation instead of one, which matters if you're doing rotations that are 20 plus seconds, because otherwise you kind of just have downtime in your rotation where you're just not really doing anything. However, HoYo has started to give us a lot more shorter rotation options when it comes to teams. A lot more teammates where their burst cooldown is not 20 seconds but 15 instead, or 18. That has let Clorinde effectively lose less from rotations gated by cooldowns, because rotations are less gated by cooldown, and therefore that has made TF a comparatively weaker option than it was on her initial release. It's still a viable option, But with the fact that the chevreuse teams got stronger and that she has more shorter rotation teams now, I would say that it very much is worth getting yourself a Whimsy set if you want to play Clorinde. If you don't want to get Whimsy because you can't be bothered, you can just do what I do. Use Glad, and it'll be fine. What team is better for her? C2 Nahida Aggravate or C6 Chevreuse? I'd say they're actually pretty similar. The Chevreuse teams have grown on me over the past few months since her last banner. And I'd say that I like them more than the Aggravate teams as a whole now. But you gain more from Nahida's C2 than you gain from Chevreuse's C6. So if you're assuming you have both, they're probably about the same. But I haven't done any real testing with Nahida C2 that would allow me to be confident in that answer. Is Finale of the Deep best free-to-play sword for her? Or is Calamity of Eshu better now that we got Lan Yan? I haven't actually looked at any calcs for that. But I'm pretty sure Finale of the Deep is still going to be the best. Finale's just so good on her. But then there's also the fact that if you lose your shield because you got hit, you lose the buff from Eshu. So they're pretty much about as good as one another, but Eshu becomes dog shit if you lose a shield. I'd probably stick to Finale. Why do you hate Clorinde's hat? It looks oversized and goofy. It looks like it's barely balancing on the top of her head. It looks like it's gonna fall off. It looks like it's gonna restrict her vision, and it's ugly. Compared to Nahida, how strong is Clorinde's ability to also run sustain less steam, even with Furina and running 3 offensive units? Clorinde is pretty much the only unit in the game that gains defensive utility from Furina. So let me explain why. The way that Clorinde's healing works is she heals 110% of her current Bond of Life value. So effectively, she clears her Bond of Life with the first 100%, and then that 10% overflow is what heals her. The way this interacts with healing bonus is it doesn't increase the remaining 10% by whatever your healing bonus is. It increases the whole value by whatever your healing bonus is. So if you have 20% healing bonus, it's not going to change 10% healing to 12% healing. It's going to change 110% healing to 132%, therefore making that overflow go from 10% to 32%. The 20% healing bonus more than triples the amount you're actually healing. Because Furina's Fanfare does provide healing bonus based on the stats, not just damage percent, it also provides healing bonus. It makes it so that Clorinde starts self-healing a lot more through her Bond of Life. Let's give a visual representation of that. So first things first. Yeah. Alright, so we're healing for a little bit under 2k every time we clear a Bond of Life. So we were healing for about 2k, and if you just look at the amount of healing bonus that you'll get, it should cap out at 30% more when you're healing for 2,000. Should be 2,600.
Into the shadows.
We're healing for 3k, almost 4k, over 4k. And it should keep going. Obviously here, we didn't end up with that much fanfare because we don't have a healer. It was just the self-damage plus whatever she was self-healing. But you can see, we already doubled our healing even with this little fanfare. Is Clorinde bad on high ping? Okay, so from what I understand, Clorinde's Bond of Life generation happens server side, not client side, which means that when you're attacking, instead of getting your Bond of Life instantly whenever you do a normal attack, it's delayed by your ping, which means if you have a lot of ping, you can end up getting your Bond of Life later, and you can end up in a situation where even if you do 3 attacks before your E, you will E before you generate your Bond of Life for the 3rd time, and instead of doing the enhanced over 100 Bond of Life E that does 3 hits, you're just gonna do the below 100 Bond of Life E that does 80%. Less damage, it's less application. And it's less hits, which matters a lot for the talent that increases each hit. So yeah, she is worse at the high ping. While using Xilonen or any healer, is it better to burst or not? Okay, generally, when it comes to using healers, you kind of don't care. Using Xilonen's burst is something you can do. If you have downtime in your rotation, then there's no punishment for using it. So like, yeah, sure, you should. But if you don't have downtime and you extend your rotation by using your Xilonen burst, then it's not worth doing. And in most teams, you generally don't tend to have too much downtime. At which step in the rotation does her burst get used in a Nahida Amber, like Proto Amber Nahida, Fischl and Furina team when you get the energy for it? There's the age-old do you Clorinde burst before or after your skill question, and the answer to that is you click on the button when it's purple. If the button is purple, you can use it. If not, then don't. And that's kind of it. In terms of like simmed DPS, it tends to be better to use after, but Clorinde's AoE is awful and worthless without her burst. And so in a lot of situations, you kind of just use the burst when the enemies are grouped, which tends to happen at the start of the rotation, not at the end. So just press the button when it's purple, who cares? Have fun. What's your most premium team? I mean, it depends on how much you hate your life. I'm not entirely sure because I don't look into this stuff because I don't hate myself. But I've had people tell me that the Sarah teams are her ceiling teams. But like, man. But like, I'd say Maoika, C6 Chevreuse, and then another Electro character, Sarah, Fischl, or Ron. Do you consider her early constellations to be worth it? I never consider her constellations to be worth it, period. But like, I'm assuming you're asking like, how do they compare to other carries? They're fairly average. The biggest issue with her constellations is that Clorinde is not a character like Maoika or Arlecchino that deals the large majority of her team's damage. Right? If you look at the damage distribution, and this is like probably the best use of DC Sim. DC Sim has damage distribution for all the teams in the database. So if you want a decent idea for what the damage distribution of a team looks like, DC Sim is a great tool for that. But yeah, we can look at the damage distribution in these teams, right? So here, this is a Fischl, Channeling, Chevreuse team. Clorinde is doing a little bit over half the damage. Fischl with Toma, it becomes a little bit more than half because, well, Toma just has less damage and damage percent buff. All in on Clorinde personal damage, right? You get about 3/4, right? 2/3, half, less than half, half. Anyways, the point being, there's quite a few of her teams where she's not doing that big of a portion of the team DPS. She's still the character in her team that's doing the most damage, but it's not like 90%, like what you'd expect out of a Maoika or Arlecchino team. And so the increase from constellations is also comparatively smaller than on those characters, even if the percentage increase is similar. Is Clorinde that much better than Keqing or no? In aggravate teams, Clorinde isn't that much better than Keqing. She is better than Keqing, but not so much that it will necessarily lead to significantly faster clear times. In the other teams, though, she is. What makes her mid? Basically, Clorinde is a character that doesn't scale that well with really good artifact investment when you compare the way she scales with characters that trigger multiplicative reactions. And her damage profile is... it is not front-loaded at all. If anything, it's a little bit more on the back-loaded side. Like, it's not a downside, but it's an upside she doesn't have. Other characters that can front-load damage can, at the same DPS, kill enemies earlier into a rotation because their damage comes out earlier. Whereas with Clorinde, that's not really the case. And then her AoE kind of sucks. It's not bad, but it's not good. All these factors combined make her just kind of an okay unit, but not an amazing one, even despite her, honestly, like, pretty decent output. Is ER a complete waste, or is it not terrible to have? It depends on the team. Generally, when you're using Fischl, ER doesn't really matter that much because Fischl gives you the ER you would want. But I'd say that it's never like a bad stat. I think I'd always prefer an attack roll over an ER roll, but because her burst is her main form of AoE damage, like technically she can, if there's like an enemy here and an enemy here, she can go like here to try to hit both. But because your E makes you move, it tends to be really difficult to consistently hit enemies in AoE. So her main form of AoE is her burst. And so in situations where there's more enemies, there's more AoE, ER becomes a little bit more valuable, but not so much that you'd rather have it over attack. Since she's in the same mana period with Arlecchino, is there any reason to get her over Arlecchino? Honestly, not really. The biggest upside that she has over Arlecchino is that she's less reliant on Bennett. But the thing is, in a team like this, I'd rather have Arlecchino over Clorinde in this slot, even without the Bennett. And I would say that like this archetype, like with the flexible Electro slot, is probably her best team now. So that kind of weakens the argument to go for her. But in the other teams, like she's pretty all right. So if you don't have Bennett available and you don't have chevreuse, or you don't want to play chevreuse, then I'd say there is an argument for her over Arlecchino. Does TF work in Overload at all? Not well. TF is reliant on you having a pyro aura on the enemy, which won't work if you're using Fischl. How is Yunjin not good with her when she's the only character in the game that can use all of Yunjin's stacks? Well, because Yunjin is a terrible unit. Yunjin is usable in Clorinde teams, and it works, and it's okay. But Yunjin is not good enough that it's going to be an option that's preferable to your other choices. It's just because Yunjin is not a good unit. But Yunjin is usable in Clorinde teams. If you like Yunjin, Clorinde is one of the carries that uses her the best. How does she feel to play with Lan Yan and the new event weapon? The biggest issue with Lan Yan is that VD setups with Nahida tend to be kind of cringe to do. And if you're not using Nahida, the other Dendro units don't provide enough to justify having your shielder be the Animo slot instead of the Dendro slot. Like, you should just be using Kirara. That's not to say that the Lan Yan Nahida teams are bad, but they're a bit more cringe to play than some of the other ones. Does Xilonen reliably trigger Cinder City with Nahida? It's the same as the VV setups. The difference is that you don't get punished nearly as much if you don't get it. And then on top of that, you have more uptime, which means that you can swap into Xilonen before Nahida if you want. So they tend to be easier as well. If you design a dedicated support for Clorinde, what would it be? If you look at the way that Clorinde is designed, it's a really interesting like design philosophy where she has a pseudo attack cap because attack increases her base talent values, but it only increases the Ascension passive damage up until you have 3000, and this is a very significant part of her damage. So if you were to design a carry that it works with her, you could do attack buffs, but you don't want attack buffs that are too big, like Bennett. Bennett buff is kind of too big. It's not really what you want. You'd rather have a smaller attack buff with something else instead. So there's the pseudo attack cap. That's an important thing. And the second important thing is that this is effectively a motion value buff that becomes better when you do a higher total amount of attacks, right? A lot like Yunjin. She kind of has Yunjin's passive in her own kit, pretty much. There's a few ways to design stuff for a kit like this. You can either design something that's similar to this, like Yunjin, right? And just make it a character with good numbers instead. Or you can design something that that builds off of this. Something that increases the amount of hits, for example. I don't think we have any characters currently that increase the amount of hits that your characters do. I could imagine something being a dedicated support for her that could be really cool. Being a character that like does damage, like a separate instance of damage, a different number on your screen that is counted as a normal attack for your active character. And therefore, you could have that thing benefit from this bonus. Basically something like the Skyward Sword effect. I know when Clorinde came out, there was this meme-ass Skyward Sword Chi-Chi team. It's not a good team because Skyward's damage is way too low. It's pretty much worthless. It's something similar where like instead of the weapon giving you motion value, you'd have a separate character that gives you motion value that way. Or an artifact set that gives you motion value. That's a separate number that has the normal attack damage type. You could also design stuff around Bond of Life, right? She already has an artifact set designed around Bond of Life, so there could be Bond of Life related supports as well that give buffs based on either the amount of Bond of Life you have, that gives scaling buffs that increase based on the amount of Bond of Life you've consumed, that give you damage conditional on you having Bond of Life. I think the thing I like most, if you want something for Clorinde specifically, is the idea of gaining buffs based on the amount of Bond of Life you've consumed. And a nice little side effect of that would be that that could potentially give an actual incentive to use Arlecchino's Burst on Arlecchino, because Arlecchino's Burst consumes your Bond of Life. But obviously, Arlecchino only generates 130 Bond of Life per E, up to 145 if you're in AoE. And if you were to EQE, that's upwards of like 290 at most. Whereas Clorinde gets like 105 per lunge for Impale the Knight. And she does it like, what, 6-7 times? It's like more than double the amount of Bond of Life. So Clorinde would benefit from it a lot more than Arlecchino does. That's probably the sort of stuff I'd like to see. If they were to make a dedicated support for her, I think that could be cool. Actually, another thing that could be cool is if you were to do that same thing that I've already mentioned of the character being the one responsible for that damage, like the on-field character being responsible for the off-field character's damage. But if you were to make it Pyro, you could make it so that Clorinde can proc Fischl's Ascension 4 with a Pyro overload, and that would increase Fischl's damage too. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. And yeah, I think that's gonna do it for the Ask Zajef Clan. In conclusion, she's a character. She's fine. Personally, I don't really enjoy playing her because it feels like ass if you need to spam the normal attack like this. So I generally hold, but she doesn't have particularly pleasant buffer opportunities in the sense that if you start holding while you're in the middle of an animation, it won't register and then you're just going to be standing there. Which is really annoying. It's not for all animations, but for a few of them. And yeah, she's a lot more repetitive and less overall fun than I hoped she would be. And because of that, my personal enjoyment of her is pretty low. But that doesn't mean she's bad. She's a fine character, and some people will enjoy her gameplay. If that's you, I hope you're enjoying. I hope you're enjoying her. I hope you have fun with her. And yeah, that's gonna do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.